Hey guys, this is Faraz Siddiqi, and this is the Week 7 Buy Sell episode. Zach, we're back, and better than ever. Thank you for tuning in, Zach. Week 7, dude. A lot of injuries, man. This is not good.
No,
Okay,
especially with
I
buys.
already had like 15 guys on buy. My whole lineup is in shambles. And now I'm losing Kyren Williams. Like, what is happening? Okay? If you guys haven't heard, Kyren Williams, the initial news was that Kyren Williams was just supposed to be out 1 week. But, like my spidey senses were tingling when they announced that he'll be out, like, on Monday. Like, that never happens. Like, if it's just a sprained ankle, it doesn't happen, right? So I was a little bit worried there.
They lied to us.
They lied to us. It was just reported by Jeremy Fowler that Kyren Williams will likely miss a few more games, and we might not see him until after the Week 10 bye. Week 11 is a long time from now, my guy. Okay, we have Week 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's a whole month. It's a whole month until we might see Kyren Williams again. That's not great. Okay, so who did they bring in? So they already had Zach Evans, right? Like, as of now, he's probably going to be the guy, maybe, who knows. They elevated Royce Freeman to their 53-man roster. Myles Gaskin was also signed from the Vikings practice squad, and they also brought in Darrell Henderson. So it's a mosh posh of guys, but, like, I guess Zach Evans, right? Like, I guess.
It has to be Zach Evans. And I think you can ride it out with him. I don't want to start him as anything more than a flex this week. Like, don't put him in your lineup and think you're going to get RB2 numbers. I just hate when teams do this because it's the quantity over quality approach. And that leaves us just scrambling. There's nobody that's actually going to produce. I just have a feeling they don't add and make all these moves for these running backs if they're going to give Zach Evans some type of, like, workhorse workload, anything close to what Kyren Williams is getting. I just don't see it happening. I think he'll get, like, the majority of the carries probably this week, like, at the minimum. But if he doesn't do a whole lot with him, like, this is just going to be nobodies in the backfield. And it's already obvious the Rams like to throw the ball. They got Cooper Kupp back, so it looks like it might just be more of the same. Like, I don't want to say the Rams are missing Cam Akers right now, but, like, it would be a lot nicer because I think if Cam Akers were still there for us, we would know who's getting the carries. But now this is just a mess. You should pick up Zach Evans, but I don't want to rely on him long term. I wouldn't even expect too much from him this week. Like, you're just kind of screwed if you had Kyren Williams. Pisses me off too because I waited till after waivers clear to announce this. Like, you can't even address it now on the waiver wire. Now it's like you're moving in a trade to try and get somebody maybe. And like you mentioned, they said at the latest Week 10, after the Week 10 bye. I think that would be like that's when I'm going to expect him back. I'm not going to expect him back any sooner because this was 0 to 100, in 24 hours.
I'm really sad. This is the buys and sells episode. Who are we buying going into Week 7? We're trying to move some guys off of our roster as well and sell them. We do have a couple high-end buys to talk about that could make your team significantly better. We'll get to them in a few. Let's get to, there's only a couple pieces of news besides that. So Anthony Richardson, it's official. He's going on IR. It's over. It's over for him for the year. He is safe to drop. Super sad, super sad. I'm crying. Still crying. Trevor Lawrence, the Jags and the Saints play Thursday night. There's no guarantee that Trevor Lawrence will play, but it seems like he will. His backup, C.J. Beathard, said that it was very likely for Lawrence to start, so it seems like C.J. Beathard is not preparing for Thursday night. The Eagles have signed Julio Jones. I don't think this is a situation where you go and add him. They have their guys. This is just a depth add for them. I think they just added him to the practice squad for now.
Yeah, I'm not paying too much for that one.
Yeah, no. I mean, listen, man. Julio Jones, he wants to come along for the ride. Like, where was he last year? He went to Tampa, right?
Yep, right.
With Tom Brady, right? And now, he's
touchdown in the playoff game.
Trying to. he keeps doing it a year late.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's always a year late, right? So, like, you got to...
Book it next year, Eagles Super Bowl.
Time this a little bit better, Julio.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not like you're pulling a LaShawn McCoy. LaShawn McCoy times it right.
Yeah, he had that. Like, yeah.
2 times. So,
LaShawn McCoy.
Good for him. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, guys, please take a second to just hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast app. So if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please do that. It would mean the world to us. If you have been a listener to the of the pod and you like listening, a 5-star review would mean the world it would even mean even more to us. So we would
Yeah.
appreciate that. Um, let's go ahead and get into a couple buys, Zach. Okay. If you're looking for a high end running back to buy, I think Bijan Robinson is one of the most obvious targets for me. I've had people hit my comments on Instagram at Upper Hand Fantasy this week talking about what do I do with Bijan? That Bijan's frustrating them. And, and this is why I'm getting a sense that a lot of people aren't viewing Bijan as his high end running back, right? He had a couple of top 10 finishes to start the year, right? He was outside the top 10 in 3 straight weeks. He was still in the top 18, though. So it's not like he's absolutely killing you. And
Right.
what you're seeing over the past few weeks is his absolute floor. And outside of Kyron Williams, there is no running back who's had a higher route participation than Bijan. He's running a route on 72% of Desmond Ritter's dropbacks, which is absolutely bonkers. Okay, 17% target share. That's right at the top of the league. That's tied there. That's tied with Christian McCaffrey. And like we've mentioned multiple times, targets are worth 2.5 times more than carries in PPR leagues. Okay, 5+ targets in 5 of 6 games. He's averaging 5 catches in those games. Okay, so his floor is solidified. He's still getting 13 carries per game on top of that. And those touchdowns are going to come. He hasn't had a rushing touchdown this year, but they will come. He's been on the field for 80% of his team's short yardage snaps. All right, so I don't really care that much that Tyler Algier is getting 50% of the rushing attempts for now. Do I want him to be less involved? For sure. But the opportunity that Bijan is getting is still one of a solid RB1, especially in PPR. And the talent with this type of opportunity has the chance to win you your league, right? First in missed tackles forced per attempt among 33 qualifying running backs. Fourth in rushing yards over expectations, only behind Devon Achane, Breece Hall, and Raheem Mostert, right? So I'm taking advantage of the few modest performances that he's had on his game log so far.
That makes 100% sense. Like if I had to go and talk about Bijan Robinson, I would have brought up all those points too. Like there's not much left for me to say besides the fact that you look at the production he's had. It hasn't been that high-end RB1 production that we saw through the first 2 weeks. He hit 20 points in each of the first 2 weeks, and he's cooled down a little bit. The production hasn't necessarily matched the usage, but he hasn't scored those touchdowns. Like that is going to come back. There's going to be touchdown regression when he's touching the ball this much. Like he's going to end up scoring here at some point. Now, granted, the Falcons' offense, it's a bit of an anomaly. We don't know what's coming each and every week, but it doesn't really matter because he's going to be part of the game plan. We've seen that through 6 weeks so far. If he's not running the ball, he's getting those targets in the passing game. He was pretty much acting as a receiver last week against the Commanders. And coming up, it's just going to be more of the same. I think that Bijan Robinson, you can't knock the usage, and that's like the one thing that we really drive home. You talk about the utilization that he has. This is excellent usage, and it's consistent. It's not like he's being thrown out and he's not going to have 15 or 16 touches each week. That's what he's getting every week. He doesn't have a single week where he has like 10 touches, 8 touches, and he's just not getting that usage. This isn't Jahmyr Gibbs we're talking about. Bijan Robinson, he's the talent plus the workload. And like you mentioned, I think the workload, it can increase. I think we'll see that more down the stretch as they realize, this is a guy we still need to keep involving. Tyler Algier is good, but Bijan Robinson, man, he looks like the real deal. He's looked like the real deal through these first 6 weeks. I think the only way to go from here is up. So calling him a buy makes perfect sense.
Jahmyr Gibbs over here catching strays.
He's catching a stray.
Involved in this conversation.
He has a chance to redeem himself, hopefully this week, assuming he goes. Assuming he goes. It's not Jahmyr Gibbs' fault. That's the difference here. It's like Jahmyr Gibbs, he's talented. He just doesn't have the workload. It's just the Lions being the Lions. It's fine. They did the same thing with Swift last year. They're doing it with Gibbs this year. Hopefully that changes this weekend. But Bijan Robinson, you mentioned a high-profile buy. I got another high-profile buy, and it's a guy that not a lot of people might really be thinking about right now because there's a lot of turnover at quarterback on this guy's team, but it's Davante Adams. Like, is there risk involved here? And is there risk involved with trading for Adams? Without a doubt, there is, yes. But as an old friend of mine likes to say, you might know him, Faraz. I mean, I do a podcast with him a few times a week. Sometimes you got to risk it for the biscuit. So you should be worried about Jimmy G. He could miss some extended time, and you should be worried that he's in and out of the lineup a lot. Yeah. And you could even worry about Jacoby Myers suddenly being a target hog and putting up a higher target share than Adams with multiple different QBs under center over the past 3 weeks. But it would be a mistake to not take advantage of this unique buying window and not take a shot at it, especially if you're already looking pretty good in the win column so far. Adams is averaging 9 points per game since week 4. He has 6 catches in his past 2 games combined. Those are terrible numbers, but you don't have to look far back to see what his ceiling can be in the Raiders offense. Through the first 3 games of the year, he was averaging over 25 points a game. That was in 3 games with Jimmy G under center. That includes a 20-target game in week 3 against the Steelers. And in those first 3 games, Davante was the league leader in target share at 39.4%. So the next highest player in those first 3 weeks in target share was Tyreek Hill at 34%. Davante's still that dude. It's been quiet these past couple of weeks because there's been all sorts of turnover at quarterback. And the other thing that we like to talk about here, you mentioned it with Bijan, and we'll mention it here too. He has a ton of touchdown debt that he's racking up. You know, we mentioned this a couple times on shows before this one, but he hasn't scored since his 2 touchdown outing in week 3. Like, next on deck games against the Bears, the Lions, and Giants. They're all matchups with teams that rank in the top half of the NFL in points allowed to wide receivers. So no bad matchups coming up. If the Raiders can get some consistency under center, maybe that's Jimmy G coming back and playing as many games in a row as possible. We want him to be healthy. I think that he can do that. Maybe it's Brian Hoyer. Brian Hoyer didn't look too bad last week. Aiden O'Connell's going to be interesting. But if they can just get some consistency going, Davante's going to round right back into prime Adams form. Like, I know we love Jacoby Myers. We've talked about him a lot on the podcast too, but I'm not scared enough of him to bet against Adams, reminding us that he's still the unquestioned wide receiver 1 in Las Vegas. I'm buying Davante Adams all day.
I'm with you, man. Listen, I don't care who the quarterback is. Straight up. Like,
right.
Jimmy G's banged up. Like, whatever, man. Davante Adams is going to get his targets. You know, I would worry if this was another wide receiver, but he's going to get his targets. I don't care. Yeah, I don't even think the risk is that high, you know, to be honest with you. Like, you're going to get a wide receiver 1 here. So, yeah. The way this offense is operating, I just think that he's going to get his targets regardless. You know, a couple down weeks, take advantage.
Absolutely. Because things look bad. You look at a wide receiver that's underperformed because of quarterback inconsistency, obviously different guys under center. That's going to make it even easier to buy him. So I think 100% this is like probably the best buying window.
If these quarterbacks are going to be, what's the word? You know, kind of like, if they're going to be practicing all week long and be prepared to play, Adams is going to get his targets. When these quarterbacks are just, you know, thrown in, like in the middle of a game, like, you just kind of never know what's going to happen, right? Because they didn't get those reps during the week.
Because now they all need to be ready to go. Yeah, it's not like a situation where you're playing behind a quarterback that doesn't get injured, and then you're just sitting there. You're the backup. You come in, you don't have to worry about anything. I'm with you on that one.
I think what happened on Monday night for anyone who has CeeDee Lamb was great. One, he had a solid week for you. Hopefully, he helps you get the dub, right? But he also provided you with a nice point total for the game log, so now you can go shopping, right? I don't see any signs that things are getting better for CeeDee. And what do I mean? He performed, right? He caught all 7 of his targets, but those 7 targets made up only 23% target share. This year, CeeDee Lamb has a 22% target share for the season. Last year, he was at 29%. This year, CeeDee's at a 28% target share. This year, CeeDee was at a 28% air yard share. Last year, he was at 35%. When you look at the last 3 years of wide receiver 1 utilization, that those averages are provided by Dwayne McFarland over at FantasyLife.com. CeeDee Lamb was getting wide receiver 1 usage last year. This year, his target share and air yard share is indicative of a fantasy wide receiver 2. It's very possible he's still being viewed as someone who can bounce back and get that usage back up, because the talent that CeeDee Lamb has, it's one of a guy who should be getting way higher target share and air yard numbers. But if you look at the target share numbers that he's had this year, he had that 35% target game in week 2, but otherwise 17%, 19%, 17%, 19%, and then 23% on Monday night. Okay, so you're not going to be able to get many elite games from CeeDee if that's going to continue. And, you know, someone might think they're buying a wide receiver low from you. Someone might think they're buying a wide receiver 1 low from you. So I try and sell him now off of this game and let them feel like how you've been feeling with CeeDee over the first 6 games of this year.
Yeah, it's just crazy. CeeDee Lamb, you look at him, he passed the eye test. I don't know why they don't throw it more to him. That's been like one of the points that Dallas has been making. Like, we need to throw the ball to CeeDee Lamb more. But if throwing the ball to CeeDee Lamb more is just 7 targets, like that's not going to be enough. And at this point, it's out of CeeDee Lamb's hands. It goes back to the play calling, the way that Dallas has been running the ball. They've been leaning on it. The passing volume isn't there like it's been, and it's CeeDee Lamb. He's catching it. You mentioned he had a 100% catch rate on those 7 targets last night. He's just not getting the target. So is there an explanation for this? There is. It's the coaching. There's more to that. I could go on about that. I'm going to spare everybody that conversation. But it is interesting because I saw a tweet by RJ Ochoa, just a guy he's a Cowboys cover. He covers the Cowboys. He put out that the first 6 games of CeeDee Lamb's 4 seasons with the Cowboys, in each of those seasons, he started pretty darn slow. Like this year, he has 475 yards on 34 receptions and a touchdown. Last year, it was pretty much the same thing. He had 33 receptions, 497 yards. Granted, he had 3 more touchdowns. So just something to keep in mind that he's had these quiet starts before he could turn it around. But the difference here is I'm looking at the way the Cowboys run offense, and I'm going to say it might not happen this year like it did last year where he came back and he had those big games. And that leads right into my sell, who's also on the same team, who's also suffering because of the play calling, and that's Dak Prescott. Like, we knew coming into the matchup that the matchup was good for Dak Prescott against the Chargers. He delivered. He had an overall QB1 finish. It doesn't really feel that groundbreaking. Like, 25 fantasy points feels a bit watered down to be the top scoring player at the position, don't you think? Like, it didn't feel like a QB1 performance, but it was for last week. There are a few things working against Dak here, and number one is the way he scored his points last week. He had 40 yards on the ground and a touchdown. That counts for 9 of his 25 points on the night. Dak has just 1 rushing touchdown in each of his past 3 seasons. He's rushed for 40 or more yards just twice in that same time span. So there's no reason to expect that rushing upside is going to continue to be there moving forward. He just doesn't run the ball. He'll have those games, and he looks good. But other than that, there hasn't been any upside with Dak to speak of. Then there's the fact that he's only thrown for more than 1 touchdown in just 1 game this season against your Jets. And there's no in between for Dallas in terms of how they're playing. If they're winning by a lot, and Dallas doesn't have to throw. Just look at the games against the Giants and the Patriots. But if they're losing, it's because the offense is getting dominated and the scoring upside is low. He's averaged 11 fantasy points per game combined against Arizona and San Francisco. And the offense in those games has only scored 13 points per game. If you watched the game the other night, Mike McCarthy's not a good play caller right now. Dallas's offense is still super inconsistent in the red zone where points are scored, and that's going to hurt his ceiling moving forward. There's some good matchups coming up, but they're against quality competition, and Dallas hasn't unleashed Dak Prescott yet this season. I'm selling on this performance and moving for a guy like Brock Purdy, who has a higher week-to-week floor with a higher ceiling as well. I think Dak Prescott, this finish that he had last week, is good enough to sell him because he hasn't been horrible, but he hasn't been good to the point where you're happy having him as your quarterback. I'm moving him to upgrade at the position, even if it's just by a little bit.
I agree, man. Like, he has a bye coming up here. You can move him. He's rostered in 86% of leagues. So he's on your roster, and he's kind of like making a hole in your roster right now, right? And I agree. Brock Purdy, Matt Stafford, Josh Dobbs even. Like, these guys have higher floors than Dak, and I feel like there is really no reason to be, kind of trying to get something out of him for the rest of the year. And the way that he scored the fantasy points this week, not something that you can kind of rely on, just like you mentioned. So,
right.
Yeah, man, this Dallas Cowboys offense is a little iffy.
It's frustrating,
to say the least.
Yeah.
The Jets are better. So,
okay.
I'm kidding. Okay. All right. Relax for us. Moving forward, judging by the amount of Puka Nacua questions I got this week, I think we're now hitting the game where, we can combine his low production, 4 catches for 26 yards, easily his worst game of the year by far. You combine that with the fact that Cooper Kupp is back, and some people might feel like they missed the sell window for Puka, and they're just trying to get what they can for him because now Puka is second fiddle. He's not a high-end wide receiver anymore, but he is. Matthew Stafford only threw the ball 24 times in this game. He was averaging 40 pass attempts coming into this game, okay? So the 7 targets that Puka saw was actually a 26% target share, all right? He also dropped a touchdown that would have drastically changed his day, changed the perception of him. This is a top-heavy target distribution for Stafford. Cooper Kupp isn't going to get 47% of the targets, every week, just like he got this past week. So Puka is still a buy low. All right, in 2 games with Cooper Kupp, Puka's averaging a 29% target share. Okay, so still wide receiver 1 levels. So, we keep talking about it. Do not undervalue Puka. Why don't we try and sell CeeDee Lamb for Puka right now? Right? See if you can get that done. I think some people would accept that because they're viewing CeeDee Lamb as a wide receiver 1 and Puka as a wide receiver 2. But in reality, it might be the opposite.
Right. And it's not to say that, Puka's clearly head and shoulders above CeeDee Lamb or CeeDee Lamb's clearly way below Puka, but just the way that the offenses are working right now. You look at the target share, like you mentioned, that Puka's getting. Even with Cooper Kupp on the field, he is outpacing CeeDee Lamb, and CeeDee Lamb's a top target in his offense. And the Cowboys don't throw the ball as much as the Rams do. This was a relatively quiet game by the Rams standards in terms of how many times they threw the ball. Puka, this is a perfect buy low window. And the fact that Cooper Kupp came back, he's having these big games, is only going to help you get Puka at more of a discount. You can, I think, haggle pretty nicely the price down on Puka right now. You'd be like, well, Cooper Kupp's back. I'm going to take on some risk here by getting Puka, you're going to be able to drive that price down. And then also you mentioned, I don't think this is a situation where it's impossible that things tip towards Puka over Cooper Kupp in any given week. I think that can happen. There's going to be a game at some point down the line, if not one of these next few weeks, where Puka is the guy producing. And then people are going to be scratching their heads and going to be like, oh, well, I thought Puka wasn't going to be part of this offense anymore. Cooper Kupp's the guy. Puka is good. He is very good. He's to the point where I don't think he's just going to be boxed out by Cooper Kupp in the offense moving forward. So I'm perfectly fine with this call. I don't have a problem with this at all. I have another buy who is also a wide receiver in the NFC West, and that is Brandon Aiyuk. He's been pretty quiet these past 2 weeks. He's averaging 11 points per game. He caught just 4 passes in each of those 2 games. Not good. And he had matchups where he could have done some damage. That's come against 2 really good defenses in Dallas and Cleveland. But Aiyuk, he only had a quiet game against Dallas because the 49ers were in a ridiculously positive game script, and they didn't have to pass at all. So I'm giving him a pass on that game. Last week, injuries happened, and just the 49ers fell apart in their first loss of the season. It was bound to happen sometime. It just came against the Browns. The Browns have a very good defense. That was my takeaway from that game. But that, plus the underwhelming effort, even with Debo off the field for part of the game last week, could be enough to make his fantasy managers open to moving off of him. Aiyuk's been everything that you pegged him for us to be coming into the season and more as a target earner. I mean, he has a 31% target share, 53% air yard share in his 5 games played. That's just hilarious utilization. And he's never had a less than 25% target share in a game this season. So he is consistently getting looks at the ball, even if he's not catching all of them. And he's had some quiet weeks, but when you look at the utilization, it doesn't match up with the production. It's going to regress the right way. He's also averaging 18 yards per reception, courtesy of the Kyle Shanahan system. And he's got a fantastic matchup this week against the Vikings, who are allowing the 3rd most points to receivers coming into the game. Are you going to be able to get him cheap? Probably not, especially if you're trading with somebody that listens to this podcast. We've kind of been talking up Aiyuk this whole season. We know he's Brock Purdy's favorite target, but the price is as low as it's going to be this season. And picking him up after a loss is going to be a hell of a lot easier than after a matchup with Minnesota, because that 12.5 point per game average in his past 4 games, that's going to fly up on Monday night. So take advantage right now while the price is low. I don't think it's ever going to be lower this season, especially if the 49ers get rolling again on offense, which I absolutely expect them to do. They have 1 down game. Take advantage of that narrative that things might not be perfect in San Francisco.
Yeah, and there's not much I can say for Aiyuk. I love him. I love him so much. He's my guy. All right, so let me get into my next sell. You might already have Curtis Samuel on your roster. You might have just picked him up off of waivers this week. I'm trying to package him up right now while that game log is looking real pretty over the last 3 weeks, okay? He's looking like a nice, safe start. A lot of people can use someone like him, as the second piece of a package that you put together. Let's say you're trying to get a higher-end wide receiver. Someone needs a running back. Maybe you package James Cook and Curtis Samuel, right? Or Ramondre Stevenson and Curtis Samuel, something like that. Because Samuel has just been very efficient lately in the last 3 games. A wide receiver 11 finish, wide receiver 13 finish, and a wide receiver 21 finish. 21% target share, 15% target share, 18% target share, averaging 16% target share over these 3 weeks. That's well below wide receiver 3 levels. Okay, his air yard share 7%, 18%, 13%, well below wide receiver 3 levels. Okay, we saw something similar out of Samuel early in the year last year. But it just fizzled into nothing, right? The difference between this year and the beginning of last year, though, according to Fantasy Life's utilization report, was that he was averaging a 23% target share over those first 7 weeks, right? So that was legit, right? He's not even getting that now. So he's clearly overperforming. I'd move him now before he turns into a pumpkin and he has no value, right? You might just end up dropping him in a few weeks. So is he still a spot start right now? Yeah, I'm still riding that momentum, but I wouldn't be surprised if the production just vanishes into thin air at some point.
I think this is a perfect call, and this isn't a guy that you're going to be like moving one for one. You're not going to say, "Oh, I'm going to give you Curtis Samuel for I don't know Puka." You're not going to have that, obviously. That's a drastic example, but this isn't someone that ideally you want to move one for one. Like you mentioned, I like the Ramondre Stevenson Curtis Samuel combo. If you have that, I think that has a lot of opportunity to move and get you some value where you wouldn't have that type of value in a couple of weeks, like you mentioned with Curtis Samuel potentially fizzling out. Ramondre Stevenson was another guy that I was looking to sell because the offense is just horrific. This is the first week that they've scored points. He looks good, but outside of that, with New England, the Patriots just don't score enough points. They're not getting in the end zone enough for him to have any type of touchdown upside. It's all empty yards for Stevenson. So I'm selling on him too this week. Just a little side note right there. But with Curtis Samuel, you mentioned it's the same thing. I think this is liable to shift in Jahan Dotson's favor at some point. I just don't understand how you can get by giving him one target last week. I think that's going to change moving forward. They do have some good matchups coming up. They got the Giants next week. They got the Eagles after that, who had allowed Curtis Samuel to have his first big game in this stretch of big games. But I'm still out on Curtis Samuel with you on this one. I think, like you mentioned, that wave of momentum can continue for a few more weeks, but it's going to stop at some point. And I think it's going to be sooner rather than later because, again, I'm the Jahan Dotson guy here. I think that he's going to eventually come into his own here and actually have the fantasy value we want him to have. So if he's sitting on your waiver wire, definitely pick him up. I know some people have been saying he's droppable, but that's just something to keep in mind.
I literally just dropped him like 30 minutes ago, Zach. So
yeah, I didn't see that. So maybe I'll scoop him up.
You might want to scoop
I
him up.
need some wide receiver depth in a lot of my leagues. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
go for it.
Just throwing that out there. I think it'll swing back, but we'll see. Anyway, I got another sell, and this one might bother some people. I don't know, and we'll see what happens. But my sell is Derrick Henry. He might not necessarily have hit that age cliff just yet. We talked about that coming in the season. But the Titans offense being a dumpster fire and Tyjae Spears coming out and splitting snaps with Henry, it's just fast tracking his approach to that cliff. Like Fantasy Life's utilization report says that Spears has a 50% snap share for the season through 6 weeks, and he's eating up a ton of valuable work in the passing game. Like you mentioned, reps in the passing game are worth a lot more than touches in the ground game. 49% route participation against Henry's 32%. 13% target share for Spears versus Henry's 7%. 90% of long down and distance snaps to Henry's 3%, and 86% of 2-minute snaps versus Henry's 14%. That's made Henry, whether you want to like to admit it or not, like he's a touchdown dependent RB2 this year, right now. And the problem isn't that Henry's hitting that cliff. Like I still see him on the field. He's breaking off runs. He's doing Derrick Henry things. Like it's not that he's hitting that cliff, which would be out of his control, but it's something predictable like backfield by committee that's killing him. It's the usage that's causing his value to fall. In games where Henry doesn't score a touchdown, he's averaging 8.4 points per game. Like the Titans are also the 26th team in scoring offense in the NFL right now, and that's been with Ryan Tannehill at QB. That could realistically get worse now that he's out with a high ankle sprain. And Tennessee's going to be relying on Malik Willis to command the offense. Could that mean more work for Derrick Henry? Possibly, but I don't think I'm willing to bet on Derrick Henry right now being able to power this offense through and be everything for the Titans on offense at this point, especially if they're going to keep using Tyjae Spears the way they've been. I'm all for a little optimism, giving the guy a chance, Malik Willis, but the offense is not going to be good enough to make Henry a consistent fantasy producer, like I mentioned, unless they completely bail in the passing game and return Derrick Henry to his heyday 25 carry a game workload that we saw last year and the years before. It's not going to happen. Derrick Henry's next 2 weeks include a bye this week and a tough matchup against the Falcons defense that's allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points to the position through 6 weeks. If I can package up Henry, maybe move him for a guy like Kenneth Walker, I'd take that deal all day long. Like Henry and, like you mentioned, Curtis Samuel, sell. Maybe they might have a little issue getting Kenneth Walker, but I think you can still upgrade at running back with Derrick Henry at this point because he has that good game last week. He had that long run. He looked good. He scored a touchdown. I'm selling Derrick Henry while I can.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. It's this is going to get bad. It could get ugly. I'm hoping that the word, with them talking that Malik Willis, has taken a step forward and all that during the offseason. We've heard a lot of that. He's had a really good training camp. I'm hoping for it. I don't have my hopes up, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Like I said, I'm all for giving him that chance, but I just have to see it first. And
100%.
at this point, if I had to bet, I'm betting against the offense looking any better than it did this season.
Looking bad, man. It was looking bad. We have rest of season rankings up on our website. We have trade charts as well. So go check that out, upperhandfantasy.com. Make sure to check out the daily free newsletter as well. Just scroll to the bottom of the page, throw in your email. You get some amazing fantasy content delivered to your email for free every single morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time. We appreciate you guys. Again, subscribe if you can. It'll mean the world to us. It's free and it's quick. Thank you guys. For Zach, for Faraz, take it easy. We'll see you guys tomorrow for our running back. And I think we're doing quarterbacks and tight ends tomorrow. I haven't decided yet, but just be back. We'll be back. Bye-bye.